Hi, thank you so much for listening to Joyscape Therapy Podcast. In order to earn a CE, listen here for the code words, then visit our website at www.joyscapetherapy.com/CEUS. You will enter the code words and your BACB info at checkout, then receive your certificate in 5 to 7 business days.
Hello, and welcome to the 7th episode of the Joyscape Therapy Podcast. Today we will have the Sibling edition featuring Samantha Sanders. I'm your host, Maryssa McKenzie, and I'm excited to introduce our very special guest, Samantha Sanders.
Hello.
Hello.
So, my name is Samantha. I've been in the field of ABA for since 2014, so almost 10 years. I've been a BCBA since 2020 and providing mostly direct intervention the entire time. My biggest experience, though, comes from growing up with an autistic brother. He's 14 months younger than me, and so we grew up pretty much side by side.
Yeah, that's very close in age.
Yeah, and then outside of work, family is really important to me. I actually have 4 younger siblings, so there's a lot of us, and yeah, just making sure I get to spend time with my siblings and my nieces and nephews.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. And are your siblings older or younger?
Younger. I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're spread out. My brother and I, and then there's like a 7-year gap, and then there's the 3 youngest. So
Okay.
spread out over 10 years.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thanks for coming on today. And just to kind of introduce the article that we'll be talking about, it's titled Siblings of Individuals with an Autism Spectrum Disorder, Sibling Relationships and Well-Being in Adolescence and Adulthood by Maryssa Seltzer, Gael Orsmond, and Anna Esbenson. So yeah, just to kind of get into just your overall thoughts of the article, why you thought this article was like. I know you looked at a few different ones, and what kind of stood out for you about this one?
Yeah, I really liked how this article kind of broke down their questions and looked at a variety of factors that affect us as while we grow up. So much of the research, understandably, relates to our autistic siblings. But growing up in a household like that, it affects us. It, for at least for my family, and I know for others, the household revolves around, what our autistic sibling needs. And that can kind of, changes our behavior and how we grow up and changes our personality. And so it was really nice to see just some research of how does this affect both as a teenager, as an adolescent, and also as an adult. How does that change? I found it really interesting that there really wasn't much of a difference between 2 neurotypical siblings and a neurotypical and autistic sibling. They found that relationships were rocky as adolescents and then got better in adulthood. And that was the same for everyone across the board, which is kind of cool because you don't always feel like a typical sibling. You don't have the same relationship. I am my brother's caretaker, maybe before I am his sister. And so it changes things. And my younger siblings, we've had discussions about it. Like our youngest sister, she's 9 years younger than Spencer. And she can remember being in middle school and having to go home and babysit her 21-year-old brother.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And so it's a very different relationship, different set of responsibilities. So
tell me, what is your relationship like now with your brother versus when you kind of think back on some memories in your adolescence? What are some differences, and how has that kind of evolved?
Yeah. So he lives down south, so I don't get to see him very often. Okay. So that's a whole other factor. But a lot more of just a caretaker. So he'll come visit me and spend the night. And so we'll be on our one-to-one, just kind of chilling. I am his chauffeur. He loves to text me Amazon links. So we're working on some communication. Okay. And I think when we were teenagers, like, we hung out, in, like, in quotes, in our own way. So I can remember, like, I would, like, go and initiate an engagement with him. Growing up, he had a huge interest in geography, and he knew all the states and their capitals and all the countries and their capitals.
Wow.
And so we'd quiz him as engagement, or work on, like, going through the ABCs and, like, naming an animal for every letter, or a state or a city for every letter. And so just finding ways to engage with him, and bug him. I think that's important too. Just finding different things that kind of, because at the end of the day, we are still siblings.
Yeah.
And it's been neat to see, like, he definitely sees the joke, and like he hates bananas, and so we'll, like, bug him with a banana, and he laughs about it, and, like, we'll, like, run away. And so in some ways it is still typical.
I'm sure, like, seeing that joy, right, is also, like, really impactful. Like I think that's a huge thing sometimes that we oversee, and on the BCBA side of things, and of course always trying to keep that in mind as best we can. But I wonder how, like, impactful that, like, seeing the joy in your brother, like, that laughter, that humor, can really.
I think just the engagement and the joy was really important, and I think it was especially helpful because I'm like, I didn't play cards with him or, like, pretend to play. I can't even remember, like, digging in the sandbox with him, but talking about geography and animals. I think that's really helped with finding that engagement and that appreciation for other, like, special interests of my clients, and just, like, cool, this is what we're talking about, we're gonna go with it.
A deeper understanding, but also, like, so basically you've been a BCBA for like basically over 25 years.
Yes. So it is interesting, like, especially, like, when I was, like, first getting, like, my training as a BT, like, there wasn't even an RBT, it was just a BT. And I was like, oh, we do that already. Like, oh, that's okay. Like, so it is interesting to see, like, as, like, it's almost like a survival mechanism of, like, oh, we just, like, reinforce his approximations, and, like, we just went with it. So definitely have been working on building his skill level and minimizing challenging behaviors.
And so one thing with the research that they had mentioned is, like, family size. They talked about that too, like, gender and family size also kind of played a little bit of impact. Of course, more research seemed to really be needed to, like, solidify that finding. But they had mentioned, like, the larger size families probably had more, like, a sense of closeness and support for the sibling. Yeah,
I found that really interesting. Actually, I texted my, like, group chat, my family afterwards. I was like, okay, we did good. So if it's just, like, a sibling group, so 2 siblings, the neurotypical sibling was more likely to feel, like, the pressure of knowing you're going to be responsible for this person later in life, and just having to work through that and figure that out is a lot of pressure. They also found the closer in age you are to your sibling, the more pressure you have. However, all of that diminished when there were other siblings around, and so I'm still the closest in age by a long shot. But I do have 3 siblings to kind of spread things out, which I think is really, it's accurate. It's, like, a relief knowing that, like, my sisters are there, my brother is there to, like, help Spencer out.
To share a little bit of that.
Yeah. And so it's just, like, because it's otherwise. So my brother's 32 and he lives at home with mom.
Okay.
And that's a lot for a 32-year-old man. And so it's nice that my siblings are still there to kind of break that up. And, like, we, bring him Starbucks. And, like, he still gets to go be a young adult instead of, like, following mom to the grocery store, into the library.
And even having that sense of purpose, right?
Yes.
It's important.
Yeah, the sense of purpose is huge for him. And so, which I think is something that, finding other ways to, really incorporate that for other autistic adults is really important.
You had mentioned like before this, what I also liked about this study was that they did kind of have like solid, I think there was like 4 questions that they reviewed. So if we want to go over some of those and kind of see which ones kind of resonated with you the most, but I do have them written down here. So the questions were, do adolescent siblings of individuals with autism differ from adult siblings with respect to engagement in shared activities and reported positive affect in sibling relationships? So yeah, I mean, you talked about a little bit about the shared activities that you spent with your brother, and they were seemed to be more geared toward his interests.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I guess, how did it differ knowing that you have other siblings? How did that differ with your relationship? There's also a dynamic of age, a bigger age gap with those siblings.
Yeah, there's a pretty big age gap between myself and my 3 youngest siblings. But even then, like, I can remember being like 15, so my youngest siblings would have been 5, and like I would play with them. We'd play dolls, like we played Barbies. Mm-hmm. We played in the mud. And like that, I don't really feel like that was the case for Spencer and myself. There was a lot of like parallel play. There was a lot of like photos of me playing Barbies and Spencer like lining up letter tiles in the background. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's a little bit different. It's not something that ever stood out to me. Autism was very normal. And like,
because you grew up with it.
I didn't know anything different. Like, if anything, my youngest brother, who's 10 years younger, like, that was weird.
That's it. Like, okay.
I went to school. Like, I obviously saw, like, other boys my brother's age, but it really wasn't present in my mind that my brother was different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your brother lives in LA. So how often do you see him?
Yeah, he lives like down in San Luis Obispo. And, like I try for once a month. It's a bit of a drive.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah, hopefully once a month. I really do like bringing him up here for the weekend because it's a break for my mom because she is a full-time caregiver. Mm-hmm. And it's a break for my brother. Like, he gets to stay up late and make noise because like, for me, it's really comforting. I shared a room with my brother till I was about 16.
Oh, wow.
And he talks himself to sleep.
Okay. So that's... did that become kind of your lullaby?
So yeah, and so for my mom, it's just like, oh my goodness, he talks all the time. But for myself, it's like, oh, like, I can hear him, and like, oh, I know how he's doing. I can tell what his mood is by what he's like, talking to himself about.
Yes. Yeah, especially only being 14 months apart.
Yes. Yeah, we grew up basically twins.
Yeah, very close. I mean, that's pretty close as you could get. So the second question was, do adolescent siblings of individuals with ASD differ from adult siblings in psychological well-being, coping, and social support? So this is a big one, and I think even from my experience of working, with our clients and seeing some of their siblings, and, it resonated with me from some of the expressed feelings that I've heard from siblings, like the embarrassment sometimes and kind of the stigma. And so, yeah, tell us about your experience kind of with that, and also how you cope both in adolescence and, now in adulthood.
Yeah, as a kid, I think it was, like, difficult because I was aware enough to know that, like, when my brother did something like rip all my Barbie dolls' heads off or steal my computer and drop it and break it, like, he didn't get in trouble because he didn't know better. Mm-hmm. And, like, I understood why, but it was still really frustrating that it's, like, nothing happened. Like, nothing, like, I didn't feel like any, like, closure from it. It was just like, this happened. Or, like, there's one cookie left. I'm not the one getting it. It's my brother, because he's going to have the bigger tantrum about it. And so I think from a very young age, it was just like, it was normal to have to sacrifice choices because it was easier for everybody, because when Spencer is happy, everybody is happy. And so we needed to make changes. For better or worse, I think that's something I kind of take in when I am working with other clients, and just really reinforcing and praising when I see the parents, making it a point to have the siblings have something special.
Yeah.
Especially my brother didn't grow up with any services. And so,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so it wasn't a thing. It was, 1994. Like, there wasn't in-home ABA. And so when I go in and this kid is getting one-on-one attention for 10, 15, 20 hours a day, it's super hard for the siblings. It's like, it looks like play.
Yeah.
Or also, like, it is
especially
play.
if the siblings like you, right? It's like they want to pay attention to me too. I want to play too.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And when we look at our ethics code, it talks about our stakeholders. And if you look at it, our siblings are stakeholders.
Yep.
So, like, if my brother had gotten services, like, I am responsible for him. Like, that, like, as an adult, like, eventually down the line when my parents aren't around, it's up to me. And had my brother gotten services, like, he would have had a bigger skill set. And there would have been a less concern about, like, what is that going to look like? Like, that's so much pressure. And so our siblings are part of our programming.
Yes.
And we need to build rapport with them, and we need to listen to them. I get some pushback from, like, my own parents about, like, how involved I want to be with my brother. But, I'm 14 months younger than him. Our youngest siblings have a different dad. And so every weekend, my brother and I would go to my dad's house. So at the end of the day, up until, like, I moved out at, like, 18, I was the one that was around my brother the most. I was with him 7 days a week. And so it's like I knew him really, really well. And I think respecting that and honoring, like, when our client siblings be like, hey, like, this is what's going on. Or this is, honoring that and honoring the irritation of, like, I'm trying to watch TV and either A, you're having session, or B, there's a meltdown going on. And so just really working with the family to see that siblings should be involved, and they are very important
100%.
part of the process.
Yeah, and that really does start from the beginning. I just I transferred into the East Bay, and both of my newer clients now have siblings, because sometimes I also feel like over here I had a few that were only children, but there's always family dynamics. So like you talked about the stakeholders, sometimes it's grandparents, sometimes it's an aunt and uncle, extended family, cousins, right? And I have a family who's new to ABA, brand new, and I'm like, yeah, I follow him. If you want to go do something, run some errands, but he's with grandma, I'd love to do session at grandma's house, and even having the siblings involved, I love it. And I see some of the discomfort too, because maybe that hasn't always been the practice in the past. Or maybe when there is a bump in the road, that doesn't mean we stop. Maybe we pause for a little while, let everybody calm down, and, but having them in there and also teaching them, like, not teaching them because I think they already know, like, oh, whoa, but it's almost normal, right? It's like, oh, that big behavior happened, or, like, you got punched. But, and then they bounce back. They're like, all right, well, what's next? It's their life. And that's also helped me to understand, because then I feel bad and I'm like, I almost need a little bit of recovery time of, can we play a game in that same session? Or, do we need to create space? And when they come back, I'm like, all right, I'm ready. Like, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. What
happened? I forgot. Yeah, and I also think, like, with that, having the siblings involved can really help them be, for better or worse. I think there's downsides to it, but a role model. Like, this is, hopefully the behaviors we want to see our clients engaging in, and so having the siblings there in order to learn how to engage, especially for our clients with higher support needs, having the siblings involved. I have one set of siblings I'm working with my client, and really having the sibling involved and showing, like, oh, this is how, so-and-so is happy. Look at them. They're engaging.
It's like that natural model that you can't always contrive. It happens. You're like, yes, let me capitalize on that.
And just, like, translating it, because client is shaking their hands, like, that means they're happy.
Yeah.
And sibling might not, like, depending on their age, have picked up on that.
Yes.
So kind of, so how I, growing up, I'd engage in my brother's stems. You know, we'd rock back and forth together, we'd flap our hands, we played so many word games. And so, not necessarily focusing so much on like, oh, you know, sister wants to play Tea Party, we're going to learn how to play Tea Party, but like, hey, like, you know, our client wants to, you know, put together a state puzzle again every single day. Like, let's find enjoyment in it. Let's find ways to make this fun for everybody involved.
Yes. Yeah. No, I love that. But yeah, just kind of things like, how did you cope with, you know, like, did you feel like you had to sacrifice so much that you almost had to, you know, kind of go inward a little bit? And what is that like in terms of, you know, like you mentioned, if there's the last cookie, Spencer, but when that happens throughout a lifespan, what kind of
It was just a Tuesday. It just was.
Yeah.
I think I had more of like a response when I moved out, and like, especially like when I like became like financially independent and was like, oh, like this is wild. Like, I don't have to like, I could go to the movies. Like, I could go on vacation.
Yeah,
like,
it's almost adjusting to that.
Yes,
right?
Like, that was the weird of, like, I had to learn how to be selfish in a way. Because it's just, I was so used to...
You left so much room for maybe your brother or, you know, even for, you know, the family dynamic to... Yeah, that
And I will say, sense. Like, I think it's not the case for everyone. You know, I've seen siblings that don't have that same dynamic. But, I mean, I think... whether it's like the closeness in age or whether, because like it was just us for like the first 7 years, it just, my brother was who he was, and like, yeah, this is my brother, he's autistic, and it's okay. Like, it just means, I think I like a poem somewhere that I wrote in first grade that was like, my brother is Spencer, he is autistic, that means he talks differently. And that was like the extent of my like, yeah, and like we're cool. Like,
yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, mic drop. Like,
yeah, there's no explanation. There might have needed to be a bigger explanation, but it was what it was.
And so, like, social support, like, did you have, it sounds like you had a really good, a really close relationship with him growing up, but even now, or like how you mentioned the adjustment was difficult when you were starting to live alone, like, what was your social support like? Did that come from friends, extended family? You know, did your parents have their hands full, or, you know, did you feel, who did you go to for support?
Myself. I don't know. I think... kind of thinking back, there were definitely things that I didn't get to do, so like social support. Like, I had birthday parties at my house, but I don't really remember having like play dates at my house. I remember going somewhere else.
Okay.
And so it wasn't until like I could be like really responsible for my brother that like my friends were like, oh, like it sounds so mean, I don't really like remember Spencer like as like when we were kids. It's like, well, yeah, he stayed at home. Like, he wasn't gonna go to the park with us because he's gonna bolt. Like, yeah. It was all just very normal.
What was that like, explaining, like, who you... Was it that as easy as, like, the poem?
Yeah.
Did your friends ever maybe treat your brother badly? Or, like, how did you respond to that? Or, like, kind of, you know... My friends wouldn't have been my friends then. I love that. That's not always the case, though, you know, sometimes. So that's good.
Done. No, I think growing up I was pretty fortunate in not seeing... like too much bullying or anything towards my brother, at least from my friend group. I can remember one time it was when we lived in the Bay Area, and we were at Kids Park, which is like a drop-in daycare service. It was a blast. We loved it. And this one kid was like so insistent that being autistic meant he didn't have all of his brain. And I was like 7 years old, ready to like go at this kid because I knew he was wrong.
Yes.
And so just, I think, I was a very passionate kid in terms of defending my brother. Because, like, yeah, he talks differently, but don't you dare talk bad about him. We're still learning some life skills, but you don't get to do that.
Yes. Yeah, that's, I get it. I mean, I hear it, you know, it's so interesting to hear just what different experiences, and I hope, you know, even with the audience too, I hope some siblings do get to catch, wind of this episode and hear your experience. And it might be different. Theirs might be different, but even just talking about it as siblings, and like you mentioned, for BCBAs to get the siblings involved and see how essential that is. I know sometimes there's often like the sibling is in tons of extracurriculars. And then, our client just has ABA.
Yeah.
And integrating that is so important, and sometimes just probing with the parents too, because there's some nervousness, right? Of like, he might bolt. You're right. Like if they're still young and, maybe we can manage it, or let's find something that gauges interest, or caters to his interest. But even just seeing like meeting the family where they're at, but also opening that door of like, this is a possibility, I can support, I'm here with that. And being able to kind of look at some of the things that the siblings do. There's, to an extent, our clients can do them too. And they just might need a little bit of support in what that looks like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Finding like those activities where, our client will like it in one way and the sibling will like it in another, I think is really important. And starting off that conversation with the parents of, really underlining that the siblings are an important part of this and they should be involved. Because I feel like when there are siblings, the parents are like, do you want me to take them out of the room?
Yes.
Should I send them to grandma?
Oh, so-and-so, you're too loud. Go, some do their ABA.
No, like that's our client's environment.
Yes.
They need to, like, especially if like it is like a sibling who's just really, really loud and our client likes it really, really quiet. It's like, okay,
how do you coexist?
The sibling's not staying at grandma's. They're coming back when we're done. And so really, letting families know and like coming up with a game plan, of course. They're like, okay, like when like I need to be able to focus or do something without sibling, like, what's the game plan for that? But really letting families know like siblings are always welcome.
Yes. No, definitely.
The first code word for this episode is sibling.
So the third question was, how does gender influence the relationship and well-being of adolescents and adult siblings?
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about that situation.
And I like this question because I get to see all sides of it, because I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And so the sisters in the family, we dote on Spencer and we love Spencer and we spoil him and we bring him Starbucks and all of that. And I would say as our youngest brother has gotten older, I think things are better. But it was like a child development class or something, but I wrote an essay on like, autistic siblings and like growing up in a household with autism. And I interviewed my siblings about it. And one of the quotes from my brother who, oh gosh, he would have been like 9 or 10 at the time. I asked him, what are your thoughts? And he's just like, I wish I had a normal brother. Because that was, I'm assuming, hypothesis, that was his only role model. Like, he just wanted the typical brother that would, like, play video games with him. And, like, be able to play video games. My brother played video games, but, like, he wouldn't, like, do, like, a 2-player game with you.
Okay.
And so just, yeah, it rang true. The article said that for neurotypical brothers, they had a harder time overall, and especially if the autistic sibling was a girl.
Yes,
it was like non-existent relationship. So which I think is fair, because I know like with my neurotypical brother, like it is like, how do I engage with you? Yeah. Like, you're 23 and you like, I don't know, you like video games. Okay, cool. And so when you like take that and then factor in, the possible social deficits that come with autism, like that makes it just even harder to find ways to engage.
Yeah.
And girls are more likely to, pick up or be conditioned to be caregivers. And so it comes very naturally to my sisters and I to just care for Spencer and help him out.
Yes. Yeah. Do your sisters live close to Spencer as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so everybody's down south still in San Luis Obispo. I just came back to the Bay Area.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. And so the last question that they had kind of posed as the research questions was, how do the characteristics of the brother or sister with ASD, family characteristics, and sibling resources predict engagement in shared activities and positive affect in sibling relationships? So yeah, they're trying to find kind of like those predictors and kind of look on for, what are some things that might lead into the closeness, the shared activities, the more, engaged, I guess, right, sibling relationship.
Yeah, and I think, for myself, I remember, a handful of years back, my brother, when he would get mad, he would put his hands around your neck, which, like, he was in his 20s, so he's, like, a foot taller than me. Like, it was terrifying. And I would hope that my engagement with my brother didn't change, but it even increased that, like, when Spencer's happy, everybody's happy. Like, we need to keep him happy, because, like, right now he's just putting his hands on our neck. We don't want it to escalate.
Yes.
He's not doing it anymore. We worked through it. But yeah, I think it's difficult when there are, severe challenging behaviors.
Yeah.
5 years ago maybe, took my brother to the movies. And it was a cartoon, and it was like an animal, like, being captured to, like, be sold to the zoo or something. My brother loves animals, and he started getting very vocally upset. Another family complained to the theater, and we got kicked out. Which, like, my brother's an adult. Like, he wasn't going to listen to my instructions, and I couldn't pick him up. And that was really hard. That was probably, like, one of the worst moments. And I ended up going, the next time I went to the movies, it happened to be with a client. And I actually had anxiety. Yeah. Just from, like, last time I did this, I got kicked out. Mm-hmm. And that was really hard. Yeah. And so I definitely haven't taken them to the movies again. Like, I don't know if I would, which is unfortunate. Especially considering, like, the knowledge I have and the skill set I have to, like, work on that. Yes. But it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. And, I hope too, reaching out to, like, our audience is a lot of these experiences that probably the most traumatic are not necessarily what your brother is doing, right? At least for you, from your perspective, it sounds like, but also, like, how other people respond. And that was another thing they had mentioned in the article, right? That stigma and that embarrassment. A lot of that is from sometimes, like, lack of understanding from others around us. And, when we're looking at quality of life for even our older clients, I know for me, I think about, like, getting them out there and kind of working through it, even having the tantrum sometimes, right, in Target, which is very, and hearing some of parents' experiences, I get it, and I hope that this podcast does reach out to those people, who are seeking to understand a little bit more, and maybe just with a little bit less judgment. Yeah. Because it does impact the family. You guys, like you mentioned, your brother's an adult at this point. You can't pick him up. He's not listening to you, right? So I think that, although sometimes the situations in public can be disruptive to other people, but trying your best to understand from that person's perspective. And you don't know the whole story when you're in public and you don't know those people, right? So, it's one thing to think your thoughts, but to... your actions are impactful, whether that was directly to you or to the theater manager, right? So I don't know. I do hope that this podcast reaches, the people that are seeking to understand a little bit better and maybe act differently when they see something that maybe makes them uncomfortable or is a little bit disruptive.
Yeah, and I think two things. So I will say with the theater situation, another family, like, that was a mom, like, came out and talked with the manager, like, you're discriminating against him. I was like, yes, thank you. I'm still crying. I'm still pulling the car, but thank you. And I think, with the stigma, like, so when I'm out and about with my brother, I really prefer to take him into the women's bathroom, or if there's a family bathroom. It's so fantastic. Mm-hmm. But my brother's just not independent enough to go in the bathroom by himself. Okay. And if something were to happen, he can't tell me. Mm-hmm. And so I do get comments of, like, that's the women's bathroom, and it's like, thank you, I can read. And I usually don't respond, because I think it's just normal. Like, there's this dude, like, in sweatpants and a fanny pack. He might have a stuffed animal with him. Mm-hmm. Like, let's read the room. And so it's just like, this is my normal, and like I don't need to comment on it, and like he's not hurting anyone. We're just living our life. We just have to live our lives a little bit differently.
And one thing too that caught my eye in the beginning of the article, they had cited some research before, but like the sibling relationship is the longest standing relationship. You know, and I didn't think of that even for myself, right? Like outside of a romantic relationship, but the longest standing, that makes sense, right? You, especially being so close in age, I'm sure you also feel that closeness, you know?
Yeah.
So it was interesting to kind of, like, I knew that, but to see it, I'm like, oh yeah, which just brings us back to how impactful that relationship is and can be, right?
Yeah.
And so even moving as if we're looking from the BCBA lens, how we implement our services, start our treatment, create our goals, right, with siblings involved. But even as from your experience too, of just kind of understanding, how important your relationship, you feel connected to your brother, but also, the other way around, even if he isn't necessarily able to express it, but maybe he shows it in different ways.
That's for stuff, I guess. He thinks about me. Or my ability to order things on Amazon.
Yes.
I think that's a great point, especially because of the age gap my siblings and I have. Like, I can remember a time before my youngest siblings. I can't remember a time before Spencer. He's been there, like, for me since day one. And also just thinking, there's some point in this article that just reminded me of, like, the pressure that we have on ourselves. Because there's this unstated fact that we're going to be as caretakers. And I was 19 or 20, and I was like walking to class at school, and my dad calls me to like tell me about like his will and like how it was set up for Spencer, because you can't just like put a special needs person, like you can't just give them the money, because then they lose their Social Security and all their benefits. And so it's like, first off, I'm having to deal with this, like, my dad talking about his will, and like, no, I'm not there yet. And also like, oh, and you're responsible for Spencer too. And it was a lot. It was a lot to handle. And it's like, well, yeah, of course I take care of my brother. Like, there's, like, duh. Like, of course, like, I got him. Like, it's why I have a 2-bedroom apartment. Like, it's for Spencer.
Wow.
But then there's, like, the reality of, like, oh, I'm gonna take care of Spencer. Cool. And so there always is in that back of my mind of like, how's that gonna work? Like, my that's my mom's job. My mom's job is to take care of Spencer. Like, whatever happens down the line, like, having that as my job, I don't feel like that's the option right now. Yeah. So it's a lot of pressure.
Can you speak on that to maybe some siblings that understand that might be an expectation from other people, but maybe are not willing to fully take on that role? Maybe see oversight, but because it is a lot, right? To kind of set that boundary of like, maybe for them it not being the place that they're in to take on, maybe they have kids or whomever, right? But
so I would say, like, my parents are pretty clear of like, you're not responsible for him, it's okay. I'm like, okay. And so I'm always happy, like, in the, taking care of my brother in terms of, like, taking him for the weekend and, like, helping him out and that kind of stuff. And so I would hope that if I, like, wasn't so verbal about, like, my willingness to, like, care for my brother, that my family would have figured something else out. So some kind of different trust. Like, obviously, like, my brother's in his 30s. He's still living at home. That's not always the case. That's just what my brother has been able to communicate to us as his preference. And so I would hope for other families, like, they're not putting that pressure of, like, you're responsible for your sibling. Like, I'm initiating that. It's not my parents. And I would want that to be the same for everyone. Like, the sibling should choose, because if they do not want to take care of their sibling in the future, they're not going to do what's best for the sibling. And so, and it's their right. Like, we, as siblings, like, as a sibling, without putting autism into the picture, siblings are not caretakers. But because sibling gets mushed in there with autism, we are caretakers. But it should be by choice.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think, you make a good point, right? Of, like, being able to also having the capacity emotionally to oversee the well-being, and that, a planning.
Yeah.
I think that is essential, right? Coming from like an antecedent.
Yes.
Right? Like,
how are we going to make this most successful transition? We'll think about it. Yeah. And then they talked about just, the more siblings, like the more the pressure and like that was dispersed. And also the less like noticeable the depression scores were across all the siblings. Like no matter what the dynamic was in terms of how many siblings there were, the depression scores weren't clinically significant.
Yes.
But there was a difference depending on how many siblings were in the group. Which it makes sense.
Yes, 100%. Question: what made you decide to be a BCBA?
Honestly, so it's like my bachelor's degree is in linguistics. I was going to go into speech therapy, and my cousin, I think at the time she was a supervisor, or just an RBT, somewhere in between there.
Okay.
And so I graduated college. I just wanted to get a job for a year because I'd never had a job for a year, and I was like, autism, I got that, like.
Which is probably true.
Yeah, like I can handle that.
Now, you didn't feel like even in that choice that because that probably was a pivotal choice, right?
Apparently.
Yeah. It wasn't overwhelming to be like, I have that at home, and I'm gonna
I lived at home too. So to be fair, I can remember one instance where I had a really hard session. Like hair was pulled, blood was drawn, it was rough, and I pull up into the driveway and I can hear my brother having a meltdown.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I reversed and I'm like, I am off the clock. Like I can't. I'm not doing round 2. Which is something as a side note, like because I grew up in that's something I'm trying to be very aware of, is that we are in the homes for a few hours a day. These families are here 24/7, and like whatever advice we as BCBAs give them doesn't necessarily apply at 2 a.m., 4 a.m.
Yes.
Like, we're not doing anything ABA at that time. So yeah, I just intended to take the job for a year. I really liked it, kept at it, and then was like, okay, I kind of got this. And then, to be fair, I became a BCBA after I moved out of like my family home, so like I had a little bit more of a break after work.
Yeah, that is an interesting choice, but it makes sense, right? Like that it comes maybe more naturally to you, and you see things from a different lens.
Yeah,
and that's a huge strength.
Yeah, and it was kind of different, especially because at the time when I started, it was very much, quiet hands, look me in the eyes. And that was, I would say, for the first year, I was like very confused about that because it's like, I never pressured my brother to make eye contact, and like we had a relationship. Like my brother and I flap our hands together. Like I was really confused. And so that was another reason why I was like, okay, like this field is doing this. It was shifting at the time.
Yes.
But I was like, if I become a BCBA, I can make a bigger impact. And so just like really taking this, like, I want to give my clients beneficial skills without taking away anything that's not harming them.
Yeah. And see, and this seems like it came a little bit more naturally for you, or maybe it was already a precedent within your guys' household, right? Like to embrace his stims, or to, allow him to engage in his interests, which sometimes that's not always the case, right? Which is also, whether that be within the home and, it's like there's too much of this stimming, one reason, and it's maybe a priority for the family to stop it.
Yeah.
And then also we're looking at kind of ABA that has evolved where we are learning, right? Like, is that something we're going to intervene on if it's not disruptive or impeding their learning and it's making them happy?
Yes.
So I think like that is also, kind of an interesting thing to that you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was just like, it was that, like, it's not harming anyone. To be fair, growing up, my brother insisted on watching our VHSs rewind. So like, you would press stop and then rewind.
Yes,
no,
back
we're
in the
not
day.
pressing stop.
Oh.
So we have to watch them backwards. However, that ruins VHSs. So that was destructive. Okay. We let him do it. It was very frustrating and super annoying. But like I said, really harming anyone. Like, we'll survive if we have to go find another VHS of like Barney. It'll be okay. It's especially now, like, my brother's world can be very small. You know, he's not able to be in a group home. He's not able to go to a day program. But like, these things bring him enjoyment. If it's watching VHSs backwards, which I don't think he does anymore. He does still watch VHSs. I sent him one.
Wow. I mean, how hard is it to find it?
You'd be surprised, honestly.
Okay. Yeah. Like eBay or something?
Yeah, eBay.
Okay.
Yeah, even Amazon. Like, people
really?
like sell them on Amazon.
Okay.
From like a distribution center.
Yeah.
It's not that bad. And they're like $5-10.
Okay.
And thrift stores. We love thrift
stores.
So, I know, yeah. But I don't think we're ruining them. I wonder if he knows that they're a commodity now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, at the end of the day, like, these things weren't hurting him. And, you know, finding, like, ways of, like, oh, he's communicating. So, like, you know, his happy stem is like, okay, like, we know how he's feeling. Or he has a script, baby panda diaper changer. Don't know where it came from, but it means he's upset.
Oh.
I don't know.
Okay. Just out here speaking his language.
Yeah,
wow. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was just like, well, like, we understand him. I probably wouldn't give the same advice to a family now of like, we understand him, let's give him some more words, because that's not helpful in school.
Yeah.
But we were making it work. It was the 90s. It was a different time.
Yeah. Yeah. So just kind of going off of that, well, I love that. Let's make the code word for today is going to be VHS. But one thing I wanted to check in with you about, so with your kind of growing up and just having maybe it be more of a norm to embrace some, the behaviors that Spencer showed, how do you think it would have impacted your life if at the time you had ABA or he had ABA? Especially knowing, the evolution of things, because I think that's important to speak on of like how things have changed. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Are we talking 90s ABA or today's ABA?
90s ABA.
Oh gosh. So honestly, I felt really torn, which is hard because like I'm really passionate about, being so ethical in the way we do ABA here, and just so compassionate and really making sure this benefits our clients. However, at the end of the day, my brother is 32 and he can't tell us when he's sick. He went through a period where he was slapping at his face, and we really like till it was red. It was really rough, and we realized that a crown on his tooth had popped off.
Oh.
So he was in pain, and he couldn't tell us. He's been kicked out of a handful of day programs, even like severe behavioral day programs. They just like had BCBAs on staff, so that could be saying something about the program. But yeah, he's 32 and he's stuck at home. He's happy, but there could be other things. And so while 90s ABA, there's a lot of iffy stuff that went on. I do often wonder that like he could have had a lot more.
I love that honest opinion. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Of course.
And I think that's also important for people to hear, because we are not 90s ABA anymore, and not to live in the past. It was actually, maybe I kind of probed the question to get something else, but it came out to be more meaningful, because it also helps us as BCBAs, a service provider, whomever, to really understand, because there's a lot of stigma still around ABA.
Yeah.
And a lot of it too, it sounds like though your family understood Spencer.
Yes.
And that is an important piece that anybody that comes into your household and is working to provide services, treatment, and assist with your brother, even looking at now, right? Like, you guys should have a say.
Yeah.
And again, not to live in the past, but I think you bring up a really good point of the skills that we should be focusing on, right? Should be individualized. The family should be involved, siblings especially.
Yes.
Right? So thank you. To be a little bit raw and vulnerable is not easy, and your experience is, so unique.
Yeah, it's definitely something I take in because, yes, my brother is happy. I know that. But I also know where these kids could be ending up if they aren't learning these skills now. Because, my brother does not enjoy my mom brushing his teeth or shaving him or giving him a shower. I don't think my mom likes it. So those kinds of things could have been targeted.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. Is there anything in particular on the research as we kind of wrap up that you wanted to make sure we touch on and review?
I think just like a quick review of like things. So, when we're working with siblings, really emphasizing with the family that we want to work with the siblings. We need them. They're part of the environment. And it's really important to make sure that they are able to be engaged with the siblings. We know our siblings really, really well. It's a different type of relationship than a parent and a child or, our peers. And really taking our needs into account. And so I'll have separate goals of like sibling engagement.
Yes.
Requesting access with siblings because it's always going to look different. And really just honoring that relationship and, highlighting the importance of, working on these skills so that the client is independent as possible.
Yes. And also, even having that sibling involved, right? It helps with their bond. How that happens, it doesn't always have to be like a structured turn-taking game. You pointed out, like, let's cater it to the interests and help the sibling recognize some of the cues, like, oh, it looks like he's happy. This is what it looks like. Or, this is what it's perceived to look like, right? Or maybe he is saying words, and maybe it might be like a different phrase that we might be like, oh, that's just something, but it's like, no, actually,
wait, I know what that means.
I can translate it. Oh, I love that. You speak his language. So often it is, like the siblings know their sibling. They see them on a day-to-day basis, right? So I love that, honoring that relationship and honoring their input.
I think it's very easy as an adult to not listen to a child. Like, what do they know? We know a lot. We've picked up on a lot. We're there 24/7, and we don't have the same filter as the parents do.
Yes.
So we'll have a different conversation with the siblings. And I think it could be really healthy as well. Just like, growing up with a sibling with a disability, but being involved in the process of helping them.
Yes.
That probably would have been really cool. I mean, I helped Spencer in a different way, but like just thinking of like, working with his team members.
Yeah. So just to touch on a few things too of like measurement and breakdown, like they looked at like sibling relationship quality and the engagement of shared activities and positive effect. So they actually had kind of, I think it was a questionnaire, right? Where it's like, what did the activities look like? Going out for a meal, going shopping, running errands. And they did a positive affect index, which was also questions to determine feelings toward the siblings. With ASD, such as how affectionate were you or do you feel? So I thought those questions were, very interesting. Any thoughts on?
I think what they talked about was that there was less engagement as adults, but I think there's a more intentional engagement. Because it's like, I engaged with my brother as a teenager because like we shared rooms, we had to. Whereas like as an adult, especially not living in the same city as him, it is very intentional when I see him.
Yes.
And so there's a lot more purpose behind it.
Oh.
Which I think, helps with that positive relationship. Just I think one of the questions on the positive affect was like, how does your sibling show affection towards you? And like, I'm still thinking about that. It's like,
That's good.
Like, I guess I assume my brother loves me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I hope he does. He certainly puts up with me, which I think in sibling talk, like, that's love. But I thought that was a great question. And just like, working with siblings and really, this is how your sibling shows enjoyment.
Yes.
Because
it might never be heard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But to know what it might look like for your sibling, or to know the cues that say, at least I know he's happy with me,
yes.
right? Or like you said,
yes.
he tolerates me. But you can feel that, and no matter how BCBA objective we might be, right? We feel it. It's a feeling. So that was cool. I thought that was cool. And then so they also like kind of measurements too of like psychological well-being, coping skills on an 8-point scale for which strategies were used in distress.
Yeah.
And this was kind of what they based a lot of the findings to on, like active planning, like you mentioned, being intentional.
Yes. And that's what they found, and I think obviously like my coping skills now are a little bit biased, but like as adolescents, we were more likely to just like solve the emotions and cope with it. Mm-hmm. And so, I did theater growing up, so maybe that was my outlet.
Yes.
Whereas, like, as adults, we, like, what the research showed is we're more likely to have a problem-solving coping strategy.
Yes.
Which is, like, doubly so, because I'm like, no, I really know what I'm talking about, you guys. Like, you guys should do this. It's great. Use a token board. It's fun. Game a quarter. I love it. And so, yeah, that definitely holds true. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, like, how are we going to solve this issue so it doesn't happen again?
Yes. Yeah. And so coping skills, social support, behavioral problems, kind of touched a little bit on that. The severity of the behaviors, does matter. And like you mentioned, like the hurtful to self or the unusual, repetitive, and withdrawn or inattentive, they kind of looked at scales of that independent behavior. And so just to quickly touch on some of the results. So the adolescent siblings had more shared activities, but not much different in terms of positive affect between adults. And they used more problem-focused coping strategies. It also touched on the rank for reporting depressive symptoms, where kind of like the only sibling was kind of the highest in reporting, closest to the sibling in age, and then the not closest sibling in other. And we also talked about gender and family size. And one thing is like support from your parents. They also mentioned that the support from parents to the sibling individually mattered, and it seemed to have a more reported positive affect from that sibling. Any thoughts or?
I think just really making sure that when the siblings are frustrated about XYZ, that they didn't get the cookie or their diorama got ruined because of, a tantrum or something, honoring that frustration. Like I think it's very easy. Like it's just a Tuesday. It's just another day of the week, and it's what's going on. And just kind of working with them and making sure that the siblings are having individual time. Because that's not always the case when it's like, okay, like if you're going to go to theater or soccer or Girl Scouts, like we have to get them in the car. That might be really hard. Yeah. And like, I can actually remember, we did like a church activity together for a while, but then Spencer got to stop going because he had to be home to watch Wheel of Fortune. And so just like, or we had to leave somewhere because he had to go home and watch Wheel of Fortune. And so, hey, record those now. That would have been really helpful.
On demand.
Like, finding some problem solving. I know some families that I work with, they take 2 cars places. It's not the greatest for the environment, but it's also really nice not having to end something because your sibling doesn't want to be there anymore. Yeah. So we both I get to stay and enjoy it. And my brother would have gotten to go home because he doesn't want to be there. We both would have been honored in those situations.
Yes, yeah, which I'm sure can be hard, but yeah, in the research they also mentioned like what can we do as practitioners or clinicians to support that, to support more closeness, more engagement, and increase that positive affect in sibling relationships. And that's where it was too, right? It's like coming from that problem solved or problem focused approach, and supporting that in the best way we can. But yeah, that's all I have. I don't know if you have any last thoughts or advice to siblings, maybe adolescent siblings who come from a more emotion focus.
I think, just for advice for siblings, especially like for BCBAs to, I think, just honoring us and respecting what we have to say and our input. Knowing that we as siblings can speak up. Like, hey, XYZ, which my brother received ABA for like 2 years as an adult. And I would speak up, like, this isn't how XYZ should be going.
Yeah.
And like, our opinions are valid.
Yes. Well, thank you, Sam, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I appreciate it, and I'm sure our audience appreciates your unique lens and coming from BCBA and a sibling.